The life of Jesus in the New Testament is primarily outlined in the four canonical Gospels. It includes his genealogy and nativity, public ministry, passion, prophecy, resurrection and ascension. Let us delve deeper into this on this video.
The genealogy and nativity of Jesus are described in two of the four canonical Gospels, the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. While Luke traces the genealogy upwards towards Adam and God, Matthew traces it downwards towards Jesus. Both Gospels state that Jesus was begotten not by Joseph, but conceived miraculously in the womb of Mary, mother of Jesus, by the Holy Spirit. Mary, Jesus' mother and a virgin, was betrothed to Joseph. Angel Gabriel was sent to her in the town of Galilee called Nazareth, and said, "Hail, favored one, the Lord is with you. Behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall name him Jesus. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you." And Mary said, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. May it be done unto me according to your word." Joseph, a righteous man yet unwilling to expose Mary to shame, decided to divorce her quietly. Such was his intention when an angel came to him in a dream and commanded him to take Mary into his home, to which he obliged. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus, a census which everyone must enroll each to his own town. Joseph and Mary travel from their home in Nazareth for the census to Bethlehem.
While they were there, the time came for Mary to have her child. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. There were shepherds in that region living in the fields and keeping the night watch over their flock. The angel of the Lord appeared before them and told them of the birth of the Messiah. The shepherds visited Jesus, but they weren't the only ones. The infamous three kings brought their offerings as well of gold, frankincense and myrrh, following the star. King Herod sent them to find Jesus, but an angel in a dream told them not to return. An angel came to Joseph in a dream and told them to flee to Egypt, for Herod is in search for the child to destroy him. The family fled towards Egypt. When Herod found out that he was deceived by the Magi, he was furious and ordered the massacre of all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity 2 years old and under. When Herod died, an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and commanded him to go to the land of Israel. But when Joseph found out that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he departed for the region of Galilee and went to a town called Nazareth. Each year when his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to the festival custom. When they returned home, Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem and his parents did not know it. After 3 days, they had found him in a temple sitting, listening, and asking questions with the teachers. This is when Jesus said, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand him. In the Gospels, the ministry of Jesus starts with his baptism by John the Baptist, when he is about 30 years old. Jesus came to the Jordan River, where he was baptized by John. The baptismal scene includes the heavens opening, a dove-like descent of the Holy Spirit, and a voice from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased."
The temptation of Jesus is detailed in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In these narratives, after being baptized, Jesus fasted for 40 days and nights in the Judean desert. During this time, Satan appeared to Jesus and tempted him. Jesus having refused each temptation, Satan departed and angels came and brought nourishment to Jesus. This early period also includes the first miracle of Jesus in the marriage at Cana, in the Gospel of John, where Jesus and his disciples are invited to a wedding, and when the wine runs out, Jesus turns water into wine by performing a miracle. The Gospel of John reports the first encounter with two of the disciples a little earlier in the presence of John the Baptist. In the Gospel of Luke, the event is part of the first miraculous catch of fish and results in Peter as well as James and John, the sons of Zebedee, joining Jesus vocationally as disciples. The gathering of the disciples in John follows the many patterns of discipleship that continue in the New Testament. Jesus' activities in Galilee include a number of miracles and teachings. After hearing of John the Baptist's death, Jesus withdraws by boat privately to a solitary place near Bethsaida, where he addresses the crowds who had followed him on foot from the towns, and feeds them all by 5 loaves and 2 fish supplied by a boy. Following this, the Gospels present the walking on water episode as an important step in developing the relationship between Jesus and his disciples.
Major teachings in this period include the discourse on defilement in Matthew and Mark, where in response to a complaint from the Pharisees Jesus states, "What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth, that is what makes him unclean." Following this episode, Jesus withdraws into the parts of Tyre and Sidon near the Mediterranean Sea, where the Canaanite woman's daughter episode takes place in Matthew and Mark. This episode is an example of how Jesus emphasizes the value of faith. The importance of faith is also emphasized in the cleansing 10 lepers episode in Luke. The confession of Peter refers to an episode in the New Testament in which Jesus asks a question to his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" To which Apostle Peter proclaims Jesus to be Christ, the expected Messiah. In Matthew, Jesus blesses Peter for his answer, and later indicates him as the rock of the church, and states that he will give Peter the keys of the kingdom of heaven. The Transfiguration of Jesus is an episode in the New Testament narrative in which Jesus is transfigured and becomes radiant upon a mountain. In the mountain, Jesus begins to shine with bright rays of light. Then the prophets Moses and Elijah appear next to him and he speaks with them. The last week in Jerusalem is the conclusion of the journey which Jesus had started in Galilee through Perea and Judea. At the beginning of the week, as Jesus enters Jerusalem, he is greeted by the cheering crowds. During the week of his final ministry in Jerusalem, Jesus visits the temple and has a conflict with the money changers about their use of the temple for commercial purposes. This is followed by a debate with the priests and the elder in which his authority is questioned. Towards the end of the week, Jesus has the Last Supper with his disciples, during which he institutes the Eucharist. Immediately after the Last Supper, Jesus was accompanied by Peter, James, and John in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed. One of Jesus' disciples, Judas Iscariot, decides to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. While in the garden, Judas appears, accompanied by a crowd that includes the Jewish priests and elders and people with weapons. Judas gives Jesus a kiss to identify him to the crowd, who then arrests Jesus. One of Jesus' disciples tried to stop them and used a sword to cut off the ear of one of the men, which Jesus miraculously healed. Jesus is taken to the Sanhedrin, a Jewish judicial body. Jesus is tried by the Sanhedrin, mocked and beaten, and is condemned for making claims of being the Son of God. He is then taken to Pontius Pilate, and the Jewish elders ask Pilate to judge and condemn Jesus, accusing him of claiming to be the King of the Jews. After questioning, with few replies provided by Jesus, Pilate publicly declares that he finds Jesus innocent, but the crowd insists on punishment. The universal rule of the Roman Empire limited capital punishment strictly to the tribunal of the Roman governor, and Pilate decided to publicly wash his hands as not being privy to Jesus' death. After the trials, Jesus made his way to Calvary, and the 3 synoptic Gospels indicate that he was assisted by Simon of Cyrene, the Romans compelling him to do so. The soldiers then crucified Jesus and cast lots for his clothes. Above Jesus' head on the cross was the inscription "King of the Jews," and the soldiers and those passing by mocked him about the title. Jesus was crucified between 2 convicted thieves, one of whom rebuked Jesus, while the other defended him. In the 3 synoptic Gospels, various supernatural events accompany the crucifixion, including darkness of the sky, an earthquake, and, in Matthew, the resurrection of saints. Following Jesus' death on Friday, Joseph of Arimathea asked the permission of Pilate to remove the body. The body was removed from the cross, was wrapped in a clean cloth and buried in a new rock-hewn tomb, with the assistance of Nicodemus. In Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, his resurrection is announced and explained to the followers who arrive there early in the morning by either 1 or 2 beings, either men or angels, dressed in bright robes, who appear in or near the tomb. The Gospel accounts vary as to who arrived at the tomb first, but they are women and are instructed by the risen Jesus to inform the other disciples.
Jesus then appears to his followers that day and a number of times thereafter, delivers sermons and has supper with some of them, before ascending to heaven. Jesus ascended to heaven, in the presence of his disciples, after 40 days after the resurrection. After giving a number of instructions to the apostles, Acts describes the ascension as follows: "And when he had said these things, as they were looking, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight." Following this, 2 men clothed in white appear and tell the apostles that Jesus will return in the same manner as he was taken, and the apostles return to Jerusalem.